Hello everybody and welcome to another online video. This one is how did Hitler become Chancellor in January 30th, 1933. Now this video is going to be a sort of mix of a couple of lessons, 3 or 4 lessons sort of brought together into one lesson. It might be quite a big one, quite a long lesson, but hopefully all in one place for your revision particularly. This is less so for learning about this the first time. We'll do those videos for individual lessons on the website as usual, but this one is purely a revision video ready for your exams at the end of year 11. So could be quite a long one. I'll try and skim through bits that you can read yourself to try and make sure it's not too long, but this should be hopefully the one stop that you need for getting your head around how did Hitler become Chancellor in 1933. Alright, so let's get cracking. So firstly, we got to think about how this topic might look in our exam. It could be any question, question 1, 2, or section B. What we'll do as we go through this lesson for the first bit of it, before we have some exam practice at the end, we'll look at it as if we are planning a 12 marker. So each part of the video, the first 3 or 4 parts of the video, will be essentially a paragraph to help us answer that question there, the 12 marker, explain why Hitler was able to become Chancellor by 1933. So obviously we'll need 3 paragraphs in there as we go. So we'll just essentially do content in this video, and the exam practice at the end will be section B, really, trying to break that down a little bit for you. But we'll obviously have some revision available for why Hitler was able to become Chancellor as a 12 marker. Alright, so the things we want to be thinking about in this are reasons. Each paragraph is a reason for why something happened. It's the same for the medicine paper and the same for Elizabeth. So we'd look at the first little bit here and we'd see that reason 1 or paragraph 1 could be the reorganisation of the NSDAP following the Munich Putsch. Now I'll urge a little bit of caution with that as a reason for this, not just because it's so long ago into the course, 10 years earlier, but you'll see as we go through that paragraph in a sec. I would personally avoid this in this question. You'd have to be very, very, very good at wangling your way around into this, making this appropriate for this question. It's possible, and you could do it, but there are better choices for you. For example, you really probably should be doing the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression as a paragraph, saying how that led to Hitler becoming Chancellor. And reason 3, the Nazi propaganda and the broad appeal of the party, where Hitler doesn't really appeal to any one policy or one particular group, trying to get as many votes as he can. And then reason 4 in this lesson, we'll look at the weakness of the Weimar Republic, or the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic and its constitution, that essentially what Hitler is going to exploit and say that democracy isn't working, look how weak it is, it means this is happening, this is happening. But if you had one strong leader, like the good old days under a monarch, Hitler essentially would be that strong leader, all the problems in Weimar Germany would just go away. So that's the gist of it. So try and think about this lesson now, this revision video, in the terms of these 4 broad reasons, and then we'll break them down in this video into paragraphs. Okay, so maybe if you put your notes, as you're doing your notes in this, if you're doing mind maps or just straight notes onto a Google Doc or whatever, put them underneath these categories or these reasons. That will just help organize your thoughts a little bit for when you do attempt this question. Okay, so let's start with the Munich Putsch then, the reorganization of the party. Now, we should know pretty much now that the Munich Putsch was a disaster in lots of ways, particularly in the fact that the Nazi party were banned, Hitler went to prison, but while he's in prison, obviously he writes Mein Kampf, which is his plan to take over Germany and how he sees the 1,000-year Reich. So what you have to make sure, and this is why I don't think this would be a particularly good topic to choose in this question, but lots of people do, hence why I've put it into the video, is be careful, because if it was because of the Munich Putsch, then Hitler would have become Chancellor much earlier. So it's really hard to argue why the Munich Putsch was so important, the fact that it didn't help him get into power. However, the reorganization as a result of the Munich Putsch, that is a valid argument, still more difficult than the other topics that we'll look at today in this video, but it is there possible. So following the Munich Putsch, we know that Hitler gets out of prison after just 9 months of his 5-year sentence. He is now internationally known. The NSDAP are now very well known as well, despite the fact the Munich Putsch was a bit of a disaster. people now know who Hitler is and who this party is. The ban on the party was lifted also a couple of years early. So by 16th of February 1925, Hitler was able to then start putting into practice some of this new organisation. Remember the ballot not bullet policy that he's adopted. He knows he can't take power again. He tried that and it failed. So he's going to try and be elected properly, officially. And obviously that's partly what happens later on in 1933. So again, if we're going to say that this was a reason, you can clearly see some good arguments there to be bringing into a paragraph that the Nazi Party were now well known, had a big bit of an appeal. A lot of people valued that they were fighting against the Treaty of Versailles and all the things that were causing the problems. So of course they did get votes. They did get new members and new supporters. So it is valid. But just make sure that you're focusing on after the Munich Putsch, not the Munich Putsch. Okay, so it's relaunched, this new party, this rebranding in the 27th of Feb, and the treatment that Hitler got, being so lenient, was very common for right-wing attacks on the Weimar Republic, showing that there is an appetite to attack the Weimar Republic from the right. Okay, so Hitler's got all this in mind now, and he knows as he goes through the next few years that he's got that potential there that he can just tap into this idea that the Weimar Republic was bad, Dolchstoss, November criminals, all of those things that the right of the country, those traditionalists, those perhaps who miss the monarchy, those people are looking for that kind of strength. All right, ballot not bullet, as we now know, is a policy the Nazis are going to adopt. And Hitler is going to have to make sure that he is the one in charge of this party. There's too many people, too many leaders, too many important people, and as a result makes it a little bit harder for Hitler to control it and take it in the direction that he wants. So all this is following the Munich Putsch, and the reason why I've took a bit longer on this is just to re-emphasise that point. If you do insist on doing a Munich Putsch paragraph, remember it's not the Munich Putsch, it's what they do afterwards. Okay, so reason one then, the reorganisation of the party. These bits now that we're going to talk about are what I would think are the exam critical bits. Okay, so the reorganisation of the party is essentially creating a government in waiting, and that's the kind of language that you probably want to be using if you're going to do this paragraph, that they're going to create a government in waiting, meaning as soon as the opportunity arises, the Nazi Party are going to be organised, professional, have everyone that they need, ready to just the next day take hold of government. All right, so the first thing that they do after the Munich Putsch as part of this rebranding is they introduce Gauleiters in Germany. So Germany is split into 35 regions. Each of these regions is led by a Gauleiter. All right, so this gives the NSDAP a national reach. Before the Gauleiters, the NSDAP was essentially a small party sitting around in pubs moaning and criticising the Weimar Republic, but down in Munich they weren't particularly known across the country, whereas now obviously with the Munich Putsch bringing Hitler to national notoriety, his court case made him famous, all those things that are valid, that you can say are valid, but you need to keep bringing it back to how this helped in 1933, 10 years later, then the Gauleiters is a brilliant example that you can choose, because now there is a Nazi office, if you like, in 35 regions around the country, meaning that if our people are interested in the Nazi Party and what they believe in and what their policies are, then it's much easier for them to find out. They could just nip to the office of the local Gauleiter, ask the questions, and there's now a bit of reach that the party didn't have before the Munich Putsch. And some key Gauleiters leaders are Strasser, Gregor Strasser. Remember that he is killed in the Night of the Long Knives. He's very popular, probably a bit more popular than Hitler, if truth be known, but a bit left-wing. He's a bit more of the socialist elements of what the NSDAP stand for, or certainly the early part of it. And then Goebbels, as we know, will go on to become Hitler's propaganda minister and arguably the most important person in the whole story for getting the propaganda out there. But he is a Gauleiter. He eventually goes up and becomes the Gauleiter for Berlin. Also in this rebrand or this reorganisation that you probably should bring into your paragraph is the organisations that they created. They bring a little bit of belonging and of course the Nazi ideologies, but they create a Hitler Youth, the Students' League, a Women's League and the Teachers' League. So they're offering something professional, something a bit more slick, something a bit more like a real party rather than just beating people up in the streets, the SA, the thugs and all of the things that the Nazi Party currently are famous for. So people can go to these clubs. Obviously these are going to be kids perhaps going there whose parents are of the right wing in their political leanings. So they'll send their kids to these things, and women would join these things, and of course teachers would. Now we're not in Nazi Germany yet, but the fact that these things are there it certainly means that when it comes to it, when they are in power, it would just be a case of making things just a little bit bigger, a bit more national perhaps. But you're starting to get those Nazi views into people very early on, all right, after the Munich Putsch. And then, of course, part of the ballot not bullet, as with all politics and all political parties, the way in which that they get their messages across is through propaganda. And we'll talk about propaganda as a paragraph later on in this video. But posters, newspapers, rallies, radio, anti-Semitism everywhere, and of course the most important one, the sort of banker for the NSDAP to get votes or to get people at least listening to them, is them talking about anything anti-Versailles, the Treaty of Versailles. We'll remind you a little bit later on and to be very careful when we get in our propagandas. Not to confuse propaganda in Nazi Germany and then propaganda to get elected. All right, so we'll get onto that a little bit later. So these are certainly three examples of evidence that you probably should bring into a paragraph. If you choose to do a paragraph on the rebranding of the party following the Munich Putsch, then this is essentially the details that you'll need to include. But remember to keep saying why that led to Hitler becoming Chancellor, and also thinking about the analysis part of these paragraphs. It's not a conclusion, but it's like a conclusion if it was in a 60 marker. But within a paragraph, you want to be analysing this thing and saying how important, or making a judgment, is it more or less important than propaganda or some of the other bits. Things like, even if the propaganda wasn't very good, the fact that they've got a nice organised party in waiting with different departments, then that was more important. Or you could even argue the other way, that they could have the best party altogether, but if the propaganda wasn't very good, then they still wouldn't get elected. So that's the little bit of analysis that for the 12 marker, in fact for all essays, that you want to try and bring that into it a little bit. But for the 12 marker, it's quite easy. You do your paragraph, you bring all this stuff in, and you just have a little bit of a judgment sentence somewhere in there towards the end, like a little mini conclusion about why this thing is good, but why perhaps it's not the best or most important. But it's not a conclusion as such. Remember, we don't need a conclusion in the 12 marker, but this will be your analysis part of your essay. Okay, so we then have the departments within the new party. So we've got the finance department, the foreign affairs, industry, agriculture, and education. All of this again leading towards this slogan, if you like, or this idea that they are a government in waiting. All of the government departments are there within the NSDAP. So when they do become the official government of Germany, if they ever do, then very much straight away they can start running the country. So that's quite a useful, and it is valid, and I understand why people suggest that the Munich Putsch is important. But what the problem is if you just talk about the Munich Putsch and you just say Hitler was now famous, that it's hard to say why he becomes Chancellor in 1933, because he would have become Chancellor in 1925 or 26 or 27. And in fact, as you'll see later in this lesson, this revision video, that by 1928 the Nazis don't do very well at all. So in that sense, it's really easy to argue against why the Munich Putsch and the rebranding was successful, because it wasn't. But you can cleverly wangle it down by analysing and saying when things did go wrong, so the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression, the NSDAP were ready to go. So with that said, let's move on to a little bit of just stopping the video in a second, just having a little think about some of these features that we're looking at now. This is essentially the rebranding. So stop the video, pause the video a little bit, maybe look at this diagram in itself, identify what you think the most important parts of this party reorganisation would be. So remember that analysis. Without this, that wouldn't have happened. And even with this, that might not have been the case. Look at these little bits and just identify maybe a top three that you think will help them going forward to become the government. For me, I feel like the money from the industrialists, so Hugo Boss, Tyson, Krupp, and Bosch, they are really important because they are going to fund the Nazi Party's propaganda campaign. They're going to fund all of this new organised party, headquarters, newspapers, branding, all of it. So that for me would be in my top three, probably number one in this little task that I'm asking you to do. I then think the Gauleiters probably should be in there. That's quite important because it's getting the Nazis' reach outside of Munich, showing them a more serious party, not just one who's going to take it by force. And then, well, there's loads. Appealing to rural voters, the youth groups, trying to get them young, the propaganda, whatever. You maybe do your top three, top five, or even just rank them all from top to bottom. And then when you're ready, press play and we will carry on. Okay, so as part of this rebranding and this reorganisation, there's a little side step, a little standalone story of a conference. You'll know if you do the Cold War course, We've got loads of conferences, haven't we? So this is not quite like a Cold War conference where they're going to try and come up with an agreement. The Nazis, under Hitler's leadership, call the Bamberg Conference in 1926. So this is 3 years after the Munich Putsch. The rebrand's gone really well, I suppose. Well established, perhaps not going so well in the polls, but within the party, it's all looking a bit slicker. So in 1926, Hitler calls this conference because there's a bit of a split in the party between the left and the right, really. So the Gauleiters, as I say, Strasser is very popular, probably more popular than Hitler, and that's a bit of a danger because Strasser's quite left-wing. So within the party itself, you've got this split. So obviously NSDAP, we've got the National Socialist side. That's quite left-wing, isn't it? Socialism. So that part is attacking businesses and landowners. They are essentially saying that they shouldn't be getting so rich and making money while people are poor, which is essentially a very left-wing ideology. But the party generally is quite a right-wing party. So the nationalists on the other side are struggling with them. They want traditional, a strong Germany, and they're of course blaming the Jews for a lot of what's going on and what's happened in recent years. So as long as the party's split, it's never going to win an election because the vote is being split. The left-wing people who might vote the left, the Nazis, they're going to vote the communists because they can see the party's fighting with itself. It doesn't look good. It's not a good look. So Hitler's called this together and is going to deal with this split in the party. So just a little aside, if you are politically aware of what's going on in the country in the last couple of years, this is probably really similar to when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. He got loads of popular votes from people in the country who value the left-wing socialism idea, but the Labour Party was trying to appeal to the centre of the country. So as long as Jeremy Corbyn was its leader, he was quite left-wing, the party was never going to win an election. And although Jeremy Corbyn was very, very popular, in his last general election, the Labour Party got absolutely trounced. So then, of course, Jeremy Corbyn left and Keir Starmer took over, the current Labour leader and Prime Minister, at the time of this video. So he was more appealing to the centre of the country. But allegedly Labour is still a left-wing party. But what Keir Starmer did is he got rid of all the left-wing, extreme left-wing members of the Labour Party. He made them backbenchers. He took away their sort of influence in the cabinet. And that is exactly what has happened here at the Bamberg conference. So Hitler calls this meeting and he rabbits on and he rambles on for 5 hours attacking the left of his party, the socialist wing, suggesting they were communists and they're enemies of the Nazis and all of those things. Bear in mind, all these people sat in this building listening to this, they're all Nazis. They all think, what's going on here? But what Hitler is essentially doing here is he's getting rid of his competition, especially on the left, and he is going to end this conference as its undisputed, undoubted leader. So the impact is he is the boss of the Nazis. That's it. There's no doubt. Goebbels goes up to be a Gauleiter in Berlin. Even though Goebbels apparently was a bit more leaning to the left, he has been given the job of going up to Berlin as a Gauleiter, and that is going to prove a genius stroke in the future. Strasser declares his loyalty to Hitler, of course, as the leader of the Nazi party, but he is murdered in the Night of the Long Knives in a couple of years. Hitler never really trusted him or let him back into the party after this. And ultimately, once and for all, the left of the party is gone. So now the appeal to the people is that Nazis are in no doubt, nobody's in any doubt. The Nazi party are a right-wing party who stand for strong leadership, traditional values, strong government, all those things that in a time of crisis, when the country's on its knees, this is a good look and will attract votes. So this is why we are saying that the Munich Putsch has led to the Nazi party being elected, because of the rebranding and the reorganisation. I just don't want you to get too bogged down in the idea that it was because of the Munich Putsch. So this is why we're going to say this. Why was it not? Because let's see how successful the Nazis were. We call these years from the Munich Putsch up until the Wall Street crash the lean years of the Nazi party. They go very much disappear. They've got all this wonderful rebranding, loads of organisation, the Gauleiters, everything we've talked about, but they just sort of disappear into a bit of obscurity. And the election results in May 1928 give us a really good insight into why I think it's hard to say any of this had an impact in 1933 and Hitler becoming Chancellor. Or you can say it, but you need to be very clever in saying that in the short term it wasn't very good, but in the long term, when the crisis happened, that's when this new rebranded Nazi party became really useful. So the Nazis win just 12 seats. That's gone down from 32 the year after the Munich Putsch. They're the 7th biggest party and they got 2.6% of the vote. So hopefully you can see that that is exactly why it's hard to say that the rebranding has helped Hitler become Chancellor, because if it was so successful, then they certainly would have got better results than the 1928 election. And hopefully you can see that. So if you are going to do it, folks, then you need to be very clever in how you bring this point around. You definitely need to be using the analytical language of short term and long term. Whilst you accept in the short term it didn't work, in the long term it really did, because in 1933, after the Great Depression, this party offered the people the stability and security of a well-organised party, and then that is clearly why they got elected. So just make sure you are emphasising long term. All right, so that's the first bit really of this revision lesson. The hardest one, and I've took a bit longer than perhaps I was planning to do on this, but just before we move on to paragraph 2, let's just have a little think about, and you can read these yourself just to save a bit of time on the video, reasons why they weren't stronger. So overall, the first thing is, remember, Stresemann's country was really good, life under Stresemann was good, the golden age, whatever you want to call it. Of course, you can decide if it was or it wasn't yourself. Interpretations, one would say Stresemann was great, one would say that he was relying too much on America. But the point is, when times are good, no one is interested in the extreme parties, left or right. And generally speaking, the Weimar Republic now, under Stresemann, is starting to look quite stable. We've also got good relations with our European countries and friends and neighbours. So there's no real, again, need for the extreme parties to get anywhere. No one cares. No one's listening to the extreme parties because life is generally okay, certainly better than the early 20s. Hindenburg also becomes president of the Weimar Republic, so he almost legitimizes the republic, the democracy that the Nazi party are going to attack. Hindenburg is so popular. He's a World War I hero, all of those things. So, of course, the extremists, if Hindenburg is supporting the Weimar Republic, then I suppose they will as well, and the vast majority of the moderate people, remember that word moderate crops up all the time in the Elizabeth course, most people within any country, even an extreme country, are moderate. You get extremes on either side, don't you? So because Hindenburg has essentially legitimized the Weimar Republic, that also defangs the extreme parties on the left and the right. And of course, people still remember the Munich Putsch, and they don't want chaos. They're sick of chaos. World War I was chaos. The Spartacus uprising was chaos. The cat putsch, it's just death and destruction since World War I. The people are fed up of it, and of course they associate the Nazi party with violence and chaos. So people still remember the Munich Putsch. So remember when we're saying, why was that a reason for them getting elected? If anything, in the short term, the Munich Putsch was not helpful at all. All right, so they have little support from the police or the army because times are good. And the working classes generally remember the people that Hitler's going to appeal to, the 6 million of them after the Depression, they would generally vote left-wing parties or the SPD, or the extreme of those would vote the communists. Okay, so that's where we're thinking about this. This violence, again, the SA and SS are just too violent for the majority of the country. Again, so maybe pause the video, have a look at these things in a bit more detail, maybe do some notes with them if you want. But certainly I think about maybe ranking some of these things as to why the Nazis weren't better in 1929, despite the rebranding. Okay, it's quite straightforward, I think, but it certainly goes away, doesn't it, to argue against that the Munich Putsch and then, of course, the rebrand was the reason. But you can definitely do it if you're clever. Alright, so this is where we are. The NSDAP, and more importantly Hitler, is now nationally known. It's a government in waiting. The rebrand has happened quite well. It's a professional looking outfit, quite slick. Very importantly, as we've said, they've got industrialist support for money. They just needed the right moment, the right disaster to hit the Weimar Republic, and the NSDAP are ready to pounce. That has got to be the gist of your paragraph. Alright, so you can maybe pause the video now and write that paragraph if you want, or you can wait until we've done the rest of this video and do the whole thing together. Either way is absolutely fine. You know, you can focus on just one thing, but remember that analytical language as well, that even though this was good in the short, bad in the short term, in the long term it was much better because it was it allowed the Nazis to take advantage, things like that. That's important to try and get you your 12 out of 12 or your 11 and 12 out of 12 in that question. Okay, so let's move on to reason 2 or paragraph 2, and I would like to push you towards doing this. This seems like a very obvious paragraph where you can get lots of own knowledge into it, lots of facts, lots of explanation, and lots of analysis as to why Hitler becomes Chancellor in 1933. It's the Wall Street crash and then its domino effect. Everything that happened as a result of the Wall Street crash, absolutely without any doubt in this, gives the Nazis that opportunity they've been waiting for. The people are fed up. This is just one more disaster in the Weimar Republic's history. Ultimately and arguably the most important reason, because without the Wall Street crash, remember that analytical language, if the Wall Street crash didn't happen, then the reorganization and rebranding of the party would never have mattered because no one would have listened to them anyway. Whereas now, because of the Wall Street crash, it's given the Nazis a platform and something to attack the Weimar Republic on and try and get some votes. So all that said, let's get into this as a paragraph. So your notes should be a new page, or however you're doing it, a separate thing from the rebranding. So the main bits we'll look at in this, the main sort of facts, if you like, that should be in this paragraph are the crash in 29 and how that led to the USA recalling their loans, the Dawes Plan especially. Bear in mind, Germany is entirely dependent on the American loans. And of course, the Great Depression, which ultimately your go-to fact that you should know off by heart by now, 6 million people unemployed. They are 6 million unemployed, angry people who remember the early 20s. They remember the chaos, they're still angry at the war, they're still angry at Versailles, and now they feel that the Weimar Republic has failed them yet again. Remember hyperinflation failed them? They are just angry. So of course, there's 6 million votes ready to go straight away who normally wouldn't vote extreme. But they're going to vote extreme one way or the other, communist or the Nazis. So that's because of the Wall Street crash. So let's remind ourselves a little bit about how this happens. So the crash happens in America. All trade around the world declines. It collapses. Nobody's got any money. No one can build anything and nobody can buy anything. And it's because nobody can buy anything that nobody can build anything, because you need that money to come in, don't you, to buy the materials that you then turn into a product, for example, a car. So the US banks, they start recalling all loans all around the world. It's everyone who's got any money loaned to them from America. But where it affects our story is it cripples Germany. Germany, everything, its business, its infrastructure, its roads, its networks, its factories, everything is only booming in the Stresemann golden years because of American money. So as soon as you pull out the American money, then of course all of these German businesses are going to go bust. So because the USA are unable to buy German goods, because they are also in a depression, they have no money. That means that Germany can't make anything. So Germans' production goes down and people have to start laying off their workers. So German companies go bust. This leads to that 6 million unemployed figure, that fact that should be in there. So you're essentially just in a few sentences trying to explain how this bit, the Wall Street crash, has led to Germany being in the state that it's in, essentially open-minded to picking Hitler as its next leader. It's given Hitler everything he needs, hasn't it? Let's be honest. So there's no money in Germany. We're back to the very beginning of the Weimar years, the chaos, the economic crisis, the high taxes, the lot. And Hitler, in the wings, is watching this, probably cannot believe his luck that he now has an opportunity to start using some of that really slick propaganda that they've been building up over the last few years in the reformed, rebranded party, some of that money from the industrialists to maybe buy a newspaper or buy an aeroplane or whatever. We'll have a look at that in the next paragraph. But this is perfect. All right, so this little diagram here, you can pause the video and have a look at that yourself. It's just another way of looking at how this has impacted into Germany. Basically, when money stops coming in, German companies go bust, they make people unemployed. That's when you get your unemployment. And then, of course, everything just goes to the Great Depression. All right, so how did the Wall Street crash actually impact Germany? So you have got these 4 headings now. In a sec, on the next screen, you're going to see loads of little statements. You need to try and pause the video and put them underneath each of these 4. So I've done one for you already. You can see that the government were blamed for the hardship. So how has the Wall Street crash impacted Germany? Put each of the next little statements underneath one of these headings. So do the headings, pause the video, and then move on. And then just pause the video with all of them on the screen and then put them underneath one of these headings. It's a really useful way for you to try and get your head around its impact and also give you some really good bits of evidence for the paragraph on how the Great Depression and Wall Street crash has impacted. So when you're ready and you've got your headings, I'll put all of the statements on and we can have a little look at them. All right, so here they are on the screen. Pause the video and have a good read. The reason why some of them have got a box around them is because I believe they are vital. They are really important and should be within your paragraph as evidence and then to help you explain why this has led to Hitler becoming Chancellor, showing the weakness of the Weimar Republic, which is going to be one of our paragraphs shortly. So obviously paragraph 4 in this video, or reason 4, but we can think about it now. You can see how the Weimar Republic looks really weak, especially how the Chancellor Brüning has reacted to it. So pause this video, put all of these little categories underneath those headings, and then when you're done with that, press play and we will carry on. Okay, so hopefully that was fairly straightforward for you. If you're not sure about any of these things, just let us know. But again, remember the ones with the boxes around, the fact that the Wall Street crash and depression has made the extremist parties valid again, the Article 48 being used and used and used, essentially making Germany into a bit of a dictatorship, which is not democratic at all. So that's why it's a problem. And you've got some facts and figures in there as well. All right, so let's move on a little bit now to have a look at this in real life. We can see people here resting on a rope, paying a couple of pennies for just the time to rest. It's just that picture there on the right is the epitome of depression, isn't it? We can see some animal carcasses in the streets again, very much like the good old days after World War I in those really tough times. All the animal insides on the road. Just the depression. People are desperate. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and in this case, the desperate times and desperate measures are the extreme parties. Okay, so this bit's really important. This is the crunch of your paragraph. This is where you're saying and explaining why the Great Depression and the Wall Street crash has led to Hitler becoming Chancellor in 1933. Both extremes do well out of the Great Depression. Of course they do. We know from communism, when you are having a tough time and life is hard, and you've got nothing to lose, communism appeals, doesn't it? It just appeals because everyone has something and nobody is, starving on the streets. The idea of communism then starts to appeal. Luckily, though, for the Nazis, because the communists do well in this period, it's like a gold win for them, because all they have to do is just remind people how scary and nasty and horrible communists are by reminding everyone what happened in Russia when they shot the Russian royal family at point blank range, the Bolsheviks, how violent the communists are, which is ironic coming from the Nazis. So it's really good for the Nazis that the communists are doing well as well, because it gives them someone to attack in their propaganda. So let's get our head around some of the facts and figures for this bit. So the workers are angry because they're losing their jobs. That's why they would go to the left. Workers who are not working will always go to the left. They feel that the only party who are going to defend jobs and workers and wages, the party of the unions. And the main reasons are because this unemployment is going up and wages are going down. So this is why you go left wing and why the Communist Party are going to do quite well out of this. But then, of course, on the flip of that, you go to the extreme right. Remember, desperate times, desperate measures. So most Germans, middle and upper classes especially, they are petrified of communism for all the reasons we know. A communist government will essentially take all of your wealth and distribute it equally amongst the society. So if you're a landowner, a farmer, they're going to take your land and all those things that people are afraid of, and just plays into the Nazi hands for their propaganda for sure. The communists are scary for anyone with a bit of money. Alright, so the only alternative then is the Nazis on the right hand side of the political spectrum. And the main reason people go to the right wing are this fear of suffering under a communist government, as we've said. They're worried about losing their land and their possessions and things that they have built up. And of course, the 25-point program from earlier in the Germany course that you remember was really vague. So it appeals to everybody, remember. It was designed to deliberately be vague, so it appeals to everyone. And the Nazis don't ever commit to one thing or other. So that is essentially why they would get some votes there. So let's have a little look at the election results then since the Wall Street crash. So we've seen already in May 1928 the Nazis did very, very badly. They only got 12 seats. But if you just look to the next election in 1930 in September, that is a huge jump. So 12 to 107 seats. And then by July 1932, they get the magic number. The number you really need to be knowing in this topic is they get 230 seats. It's that bit there where you are arguing in your paragraph that because the Nazis are the biggest party in the Reichstag, Hitler believes, and if we're going down the route of democracy, he's right, that they're the biggest party, so of course he should be Chancellor. And that's why he goes to Hindenburg and says, make me Chancellor now, we are the biggest party. So essentially this whole topic, this revision video we're looking at now, and this question that we're answering, you can clearly see something has happened that's made the Nazis go from 12 to 230. And the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression cannot be a coincidence that the election after that they did so well. But if you look at the SPD party, so the centrist party that's already in power, they haven't gone down terribly from 28 to 30, but they have gone down, haven't they? They've got a few less seats, just about, what, 7, 8, 9 seats less. Those seats are going to the Nazis or the communists. They go down again in the July election to 133, and this shows us, doesn't it, that most of the country, no matter what, even in a crisis, are still moderate. So they want a moderate party, but it's the Nazi party that have gone up, and also the communists. Look, they've gone from 54 to 89. So this is what's legitimising Hitler's claim to be Chancellor. They have got the most votes in the election. And the reason for that, folks, I think is very clear, that it's the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression that has led to that. But you might then say, if we're analysing, that even though the Wall Street crash was so terrible, if the Nazi response and the Nazi propaganda wasn't so good, which will be paragraph 3 or reason 3 in a sec, then it wouldn't have mattered. So in that case, or you could argue that had there not been this crisis, then the Nazi propaganda could have been as good as it wanted to be, but if it didn't have anything to offer the people and to attack or criticise, then the propaganda would have been worthless. So hopefully with these little examples that I'm bringing to you in this video, you're starting to see how we can start analysing a little bit, making some judgments in this 12 marker that's going to get us the very, very top marks. Okay, so the rise of communism, as we've said, is really good for the Nazis because it gives them something to attack. They can say in their newspapers or their radio broadcasts or their posters, you need to vote for us, because if you don't, you're going to get the communists, and the communists are going to take all your money, all your land, all your possessions, and the people just go, oh, I don't really like the Nazis, I don't really like the communists, but I really don't want that to happen. So if that's the only option, I'm going to vote for the Nazis. And that's where they got a lot of their votes from, and their voters and their new members. So in that case, that's where you're going to say in a sec, hopefully, if I can push you down that little route. And of course, the good thing with history is we all have our own opinions and we're all right as long as we back them up. For me personally, it's the propaganda that helps, but I suppose without having the people to attack, then, as I say, that propaganda might not have been so useful in the first place. All right, so again, this is one of those things that you can we'll talk through it really quickly, but pause the video and read yourself. Perhaps jot these things down into a little mind map, some dual coding perhaps yourself, and then press the play on the video to carry on, just to keep the video a little bit shorter. The effects of the Great Depression on businesses are they're forced to close. Obviously, they're relying a lot on the US money that's now gone. The government is going to have to raise taxes, as we've seen in that earlier task, where Bruning raises taxes, reduces benefits, everything that you could possibly do wrong. But Bruning really had no choice to try and stabilise the economy, trying never to print money again, thinking back to what happened in 1923 with hyperinflation. It also impacted on young people, as half the Germans between 16 and 30 were unemployed. That makes them angry, that when you're young, your whole future is ahead of you, your hopes, your dreams, your ambitions, your aspirations. There's no hope. 60% of people going to university, they go to uni, as will you go to uni, because you expect that to pay off in your career and your earnings. These people have done all the right things, that they've gone all to university under Stresemann, life was good, and now they see no future. The only person or group that seems to be offering them any sort of future is the stability of the Nazi party. And then, of course, the workers, they go left or right. Generally speaking, they'll go left, but the Nazis are going to see in their propaganda, as you know, Arbeit und Brot, work and bread, becomes their slogan, and it appeals. If it wasn't for the Depression, that slogan wouldn't appeal. So the benefits being cut and all the rest of it, that gives Hitler an opportunity with his propaganda again to say, look at what the Central Party have done, look what the Weimar Republic have done to you, vote for us and we'll change all this, we'll bring you stability and wealth and all of those things. And we've got 6 million people to attract now. And then, of course, wages go down as well. Just chaos, a horrendous situation. But you can pause this video and read these things a bit more slowly in your own pace and do something with them. Perhaps think about how they've led to Hitler becoming Chancellor, because again, similar to the previous bit earlier in the video, these are some facts that you put in your paragraph as to how they've helped Hitler become Chancellor. And the Weimar Republic, being so weak, has been blamed for all the problems. They caused the problems in hyperinflation, the Treaty of Versailles, obviously, all of that old Dolchstoss anger. It's all coming back to the surface now, because it kind of went away a little bit under Stresemann, didn't it, in the golden years? But the Nazis can't wait to remind everyone about the Treaty of Versailles, about Dolchstoss, about the November criminals. It's just been put on a plate for them, all right? And the fact that they dealt with it so poorly, Bruning was so bad, and they had to use Article 48 so often, really is not a good look for this supposedly strong new German Republic after the war. Okay, and that's the fact that you really need to try and include, really. Article 48 is being used from 5 times in 1930 to 44 in 31, 66 times in 32. So remember that Article 48 is passing laws in the Reichstag without using the Reichstag. So just overruling and overriding the Reichstag, which is a dictatorship. So of course Hitler's going to use that, isn't he, saying, look how weak and chaotic the government is. So lots of the things we're talking about here, especially in this last 5 minutes or so, you might see that they could fit in a propaganda or in this paragraph about the depression itself. That doesn't matter, as long as it's in your answer somewhere and you are analysing how these things have helped and making those little judgments that say to the examiner what's more important within your story as to why Hitler becomes Chancellor. So let's get ready then for paragraph 3. If you are getting a little bit tired now and the video's gone on a little bit, stop the video now, go and have a rest, and then come back to this. It seems like a logical place to come back to. The third reason, or the third paragraph, and arguably the most important. But of course there's arguments for all the others as well. But this seems like a decent place to sort of have a break and then come back to later on. Many people, I would imagine all of you, would choose a propaganda paragraph, simply because it's fairly straightforward, you know, the posters, the aeroplane, things like that, which we'll have a look at as we go through this bit. So let's get cracking onto propaganda. Okay, so if you are having a break and you've come back and this is the first task, just make a list of 5 things that we've talked about earlier in this video that have helped the Nazi Party either attack or criticize something, or just get popular, or just get known, or benefit from this situation. 5 events or things that have happened that mean by 1929, 1920, 1930, into the 30s, what's helped the Nazi Party be more visible. And when you're ready, we'll go forward on that. So obviously things you could have there would be the rebranding, the reorganization, the Wall Street crash, propaganda, the industrialists, anything that we've talked about, the Hitler Youth, the essay, all of these things that have made the Nazi Party popular and well known. So let's see. So we've done economic depression as a little summary you can see there. This paragraph now that we'll look at is going to be propaganda. And we want to think about all of these things. Now we need 3, don't we? 3 good bits of evidence that we explain. So we'll have the posters, definitely. The rallies, the promises of pride and hope, the aeroplane. Hitler could bring in the fear of communism that we previously talked about. He could offer the traditional values, his appeal of him himself. You could bring into this paragraph how he's appealed to women, businesses, farmers, which we'll have a look at in this paragraph. And of course, the reorganization of the party. There's plenty in this paragraph for you to get really strong analytical argument. Remember though, the problem is, and I think this is why sometimes you panic with these essays and maybe run out of time, is you try to put it all in because you think you have to put it all in. You don't. You need to get 3 pieces of evidence, any 3 of these, whatever you feel most comfortable with, especially after you do this video. Hopefully you'll feel quite comfortable with 3 of them. I reckon posters, the aeroplane for me, and maybe the promises. You can bring in all sorts of promises: pride, hope, traditional values, or even Hitler himself, his speaking powers, all of which we'll touch on in this part of this video. Okay, so let's get ourselves into propaganda. So caution here, this is important that you hear this and note this. When we talk about propaganda in this sense to get Hitler elected, this is not the propaganda from life in Nazi Germany. So the propaganda from 1933 to 45 while the Nazis are in power, that is all of the stuff, the anti-Semitic stuff, the Der Stürmer newspaper, anti-communist stuff, the Nazification, the stadiums, the getting rid of jazz, the radio, the People's Radio, One Radio, and all that stuff. That's the life in Nazi Germany, all right? Trying to convince people that we should be killing these enemies of the state. Whereas just think logically, if a party who's trying to be elected democratically and, properly, some of the things that you might expect to see in some of that Nazi propaganda later on, just would not get them votes at all. It would just be a little bit too extreme, wouldn't it? So this is the basics. As if you're just thinking about the general election in our country, they're offering simple things, not extreme things, because they're trying to get a broad appeal. Please take time to understand that. You do not want to be talking about the People's Radio in this paragraph, because that's the wrong type of radio. All right, and you don't want to be talking about the Sturmer and Nazification, because they're not in power yet. Although you can say about the newspapers, Hitler, of course, because of the money from the industrialists, does buy a newspaper, but in Nazi Germany they get rid of all newspapers, so the only one that you can really read is the Sturmer. Important, but if you do talk about the wrong propagandas, music being banned and ministries and all the rest of it, you're just going to throw away some marks, which would be a real shame. So just stick to posters, rallies, radios, with a sort of softened message, trying to get votes. Okay, so let's get started then. So if we can have a look at this table, it sort of puts into perspective a little bit of evidence that we've just really considered in the previous paragraph, the Wall Street crash. So think about the significance of these recent events. What's happening to the votes? All right, so you can see the percentage of the votes is going up, especially since the Wall Street crash. But there's definitely an inference you can make here. So if we pretend this is question 1, let's pretend. What can you infer from this diagram as to what's happened? Focus on the unemployment. You could say that the unemployed have voted for the Nazis. That seems like a common inference. That seems like a fair inference. The unemployment goes up, the Nazi votes go up. So your inference there is the unemployment are going to vote for the Nazis. And why? Well, because the Nazis are going to offer them work and bread, which we'll see in a minute. Similarly to this, you can have a little look at this yourself. Make an inference. These are numbers, more detailed numbers in what's happening to all of the parties over the years. You need to get your head around these things, especially the Nazi numbers, especially that 230. Obviously, you can see there at 37.3%. It's nowhere near the majority they would need to run the Reichstag. But even still in 1933, after everything, remember after the Reichstag fire, when Hitler is Chancellor, by the way, this is after, they still don't have a majority, and that's when they do the national, join with the nationalists and things. So again, try not to get yourself confused in this bit with the Reichstag fire. That's when Hitler is Chancellor and he sets the fire allegedly to try and get rid of the communists. This topic that we're focusing on today is about how he becomes Chancellor. And then very similar to another one, it's just another way of saying it. You might see these things as sources, so it's useful to just have a little practice. You can see in this, and we can infer from this, can't we? Again, a practice for question 1, that as unemployment goes up, so do the votes for the extreme parties. In this case, the communists have gone up a little bit, but it's the Nazi party that have shot up, isn't it? You can see there a little bit, though, that they've gone down a little bit, but I suppose that matches when unemployment goes down a little bit. Some people between January and November just felt the Nazis were still a bit too extreme with the SA and the SS and stuff like that. But generally speaking, the inference is clear that the unemployed must be angry, and they voted for the party that they think is going to get them jobs and get them work. That's the inference, isn't it? Okay, so the election in 1932 is ultimately what we are focusing on with our propaganda now. This is what's going to get Hitler 230 seats, and this is what's going to get him the right, I suppose, to ask Hindenburg to make him Chancellor. So our propaganda is going to be based around posters, speeches that he makes, debates, promises. All of these things are what the Nazis are going to use to try and get people to vote for them. Posters have got to be included. You've got to do posters. You'd be mad not to. And we'll have a look at the aeroplane as well in a minute. So with this poster, I'd like you to stop the video and just make some notes about what it's showing us, what you can remember this is showing us. That says "Our Last Hope." That's what it is. Hitler in big letters. So just pause the video, have a little look at what you think you can see going on. What does it represent? Why would it be a useful poster to try and get votes? And then when you're ready, press play, and we'll have a very brief look at the main bits of this poster. Alright, so welcome back. So what we're seeing in this is it shows us the 6 million unemployed, the depressed. They look depressed, don't they? So you would need to bring in, especially if this was the source question and this was one of your sources, you need to bring your own knowledge in about the depression. 6 million unemployed, desperate people, eating animals out the zoo, paying to sleep on a rope, all of those things. That is what is implied in this. Every member of society is shown in this poster. There's old people, young people, men, women, babies. So the poster is basically saying to everyone in Germany, we are your last hope. Not just rich people, not just poor men, but everybody. And that kind of thing was so successful in making these angry and sad and depressed Germans, all 6 million of them, made them feel important, made them feel that someone saw them. And of course, very clever propaganda is what did that. They all look depressed, as we've said. They've tried everything. The fact that it says our last hope, what that's inferring to or sort of alluding to probably is we've had Stresemann, that was the best. And even that was rubbish because it was on a rocky road. Stresemann said, didn't he, that Germany was dancing on a volcano. That basically means at any point it could all go to pot. Ebert, as we know, hasn't got the best reputation. Democracy has failed again, like it failed hyperinflation. It just keeps failing, doesn't it, this new Germany? So the propaganda is absolutely perfect. Our last hope is Hitler. He's given them credit to the Weimar Republic. He's saying, people, you tried everything. You gave them a chance. Now they failed. Now the only thing left for you to do is vote for the Nazis and we'll fix this. So powerful, and hopefully you can see, having just talking over this poster, just how clever propaganda is. Now remember, all parties do propaganda. Some do it better than others. This is why it's important that you get your facts and stuff, especially when you're old enough to vote yourself. All right, and then Hitler is the last chance. Words Hitler is what stands out as you're walking along. Maybe you're trying to do a bit of shopping and you see this poster on a billboard somewhere. You see Hitler, so you're left in no doubt who the last hope is. All right, it's Hitler. So this one, another poster that you could refer to in your answer. But remember, you're talking about posters generally and the general message. So offer and hope is the last one. In this case, it's appealing to women. And again, Adolf Hitler is the words big at the bottom. So pause the video again, have a little look at it and see if you can bring in some of your own thoughts as to what this poster's message is trying to say and how you think it might be successful. And then when you're ready, press play and we'll have a very brief look at this one as well. Okay, so this one is clearly aimed at women, the wives. You can see in this picture, she's very traditional looking, hair tied back. She's got the baby, the child, the young boy. The dad looks depressed. She looks a little bit depressed. And what Hitler's offering here is, if this woman votes for the Nazis, remember women can vote because of the new Weimar Republic and the constitution that women can vote. He's trying to get the women's vote. He's saying to women, we'll go traditional, you can be home raising the kids, but we need to get this man, this rather pathetic looking man in this poster, back to work. He's depressed, your son's depressed, the only way to do this is for Hitler. Alright, so that's going to work, isn't it? Because she's sick of seeing him at home moping about. Her vote can get her man back to work. So essentially she's doing something, she's been empowered. Hitler and the Nazis are giving women power, something they probably not felt they've had for a long time. Particularly those who were a little bit against the bob haircut, the women smoking, the golden years, shall we say, the free women that they got in that period. A lot of women, traditionalists, were sort of feeling that Germany wasn't theirs anymore. Now it is. Hitler is again the one to do it, as we've said, with his writing at the bottom. So another really lovely poster that, again, when you mention posters in your paragraph, you bring in how they appeal to women. So we've got hope, women, and this one is Arbeit and Brot, so work, freedom and bread. Now this is a slightly different one. This is aimed at the 1920 election, where they didn't do 28 election, sorry, where they didn't do particularly well. But the message is the same, isn't it? It's offering Germans work and bread. So we've got a strong German here. Looks quite Aryan, looking purposeful, looking forward, throwing the seeds. He's proud. He is self-sufficient. And this message, although this particular poster was for the 1928 election, it's a really clear and nice message to say to people in the Depression, so for the 1932 election, that we will give you back your work, your pride, your worth, your self-worth. Will make us self-sufficient again, not relying on America or anywhere else. So the same kind of message. But again, you would definitely, hopefully, try and get into your paragraph about posters. Arbeit und Brot. Work and bread. That was the Nazi slogan. All right, as well as that then, you would then say in your paragraph, once you've done your posters bit, you would then say the Nazis also used propaganda to issue promises. And then, for example, some of the promises, work and jobs, obviously, bread, as we've talked about, offering hope, pride, freedom. All of those things are what the people need in Germany, what people need anyway, aren't they, to be happy? And obviously he's going to promise to overturn the Treaty of Versailles. So the 1932 election is what it is, okay? running for power, 230 seats. But within this period as well, and it's sort of a little bit of a crossover, but in the case of this essay question, it's the same thing. Hitler running for president as well. So he's going for Hindenburg's job, going for the top job, if you like, and I suppose he's feeling that there's momentum behind the Nazis with the Great Depression. So tactics, again, what we're putting in this paragraph is you then say, as well as this, the posters and the promises, is Hitler uses other methods of campaigning. For example, Hitler über Deutschland. So Hitler basically gets himself an aeroplane, travels around the country, up to 5 cities in one day. Remember, this is funded by the industrialists, Hugo Boss, Tyson, Bosch, all those people. That's where that's come in handy, this reorganisation, remember they did? Now you can start seeing where that's proven quite handy. This is proven to the people that Hitler's different, because no other party's done this before. This Nazi party seemed to be doing something different. They definitely seem to have mended their ways from 1923. They seem like a proper party. They seem to really care about the state of the country and the people. And we can all relate to these things in modern politics in both our country and in America. We don't have to look far, do we, to see these kinds of messages and these kinds of feelings about making countries great again and taking back control and all of those things. So get your aeroplane in this paragraph as well. That's quite a nice thing to get into. They also organise these mass rallies. Rallies obviously go into life in Nazi Germany as well. They, of course, do have rallies there too. But in this case, the messages and the promises and the propaganda at these rallies are just a little bit more civilized, in the sense that they're just trying to get votes, not necessarily brainwash people into killing Jews or whatever yet. So they'll hold these rallies, they'll get a message across. It could be something about anti-Versailles. And of course, everyone who goes to these rallies, they're angry about it. And Hitler and Goebbels are bringing up the old days of the end of World War One and how it was wrong and how the November criminals have stabbed us in the back. And it just gets people angry. When people are already angry, they're open-minded now to being angry, aren't they, because of the Depression. Perfect, perfect. On a plate for the Nazis. The ultimate opportunist, some people have described Hitler as. Okay, so they obviously use radio and records as well. The radio will have those similar messages. They'll rent some radio time, offering speeches, anti-Versailles, things like that. The gist of it is what it is, okay? But not the anti-Semitic stuff that we would expect later on. Just general messages of vote for the Nazis, we'll bring you work and bread, all that kind of stuff. But also attacking the Jews still, but more blaming them for the problems rather than saying we're going to wipe them off the face of the earth, which comes later on. Goebbels eventually spins whatever happens. This is why Goebbels is so important, is he eventually spins everything into a positive. Whatever happens, he spins it into a positive for the Nazis. That's why he's so good. And then the poster comes out, the radio, the rally, whatever it might be, the newspaper writes about it. So I feel like we have got a very big, strong paragraph here for propaganda, possibly the most difficult in the sense that there's so much to write. Just make sure you're critical on your 3 or 4 examples that you need. But just keep saying, remember, that how it helped Hitler become Chancellor with that 230 seats. That's the number, because when he gets the 230 seats, he's got a legitimacy to go and say to Hindenburg, I need to be head Chancellor because we're the biggest party in the Reichstag. Okay, so you can just set up a little document like this, a mind map on who supports the Nazi party now. Again, it's one of those things. I'll put all the examples on the screen in a sec for you. Just pause the video and just put them into a mind map and consider which is the most important group of people that the Nazis should appeal to. All right, so within that, we've got the businesses. Why are they appealing to the businesses? They're obviously scared to lose their profits and their power and control. If the communists get into power, stuff like that. Farmers, why are they worried? Look at point 17 of the 25 points. They've got rid of that idea of confiscating land because they got rid of the left wing of the party, didn't they, at the Bamberg conference. So now what they're going to say is that the Nazis are the only party that's going to protect their land from the communists who would take it and distribute it. So they've got a 60% rural vote in 1930. Arguably, in Norfolk, in our country, generally tend to vote for the Conservative Party for a very similar reason, that Labour are left-wing, and the Conservatives, they probably believe, will help keep their land and their possessions and their wealth and not distribute it amongst the people. all a little bit propaganda-y really, but a similar kind of thing here. So put that onto your little mind map. Of course, the working classes as well, there's the 6 million of them that we're talking about. They're ready for some traditional strength and stability, aren't they? Young people, as we've said, they start on their life with very little hope. Hitler's going to offer them hope, stirring their excitement and enthusiasm for the Nazi party. That's important. Women, of course, we've said about that, haven't we? The traditional view of a woman, get them back into the home. Also help, they're going to be helping build the country, so they've been empowered a little bit. The middle classes, by far the majority of the country, coming out of the golden age. Hitler's got all sorts he can say to these people. All right, and then ultimately and fundamentally, the Nazi party are offering to everyone unity. Everyone's a German, all making Germany great again. So that kind of thing. So put these things in your mind map. Maybe not every single word. Just pause the video at this bit so you've got this on the screen. And then perhaps think about what the most important demographic or most important group you think the Nazis should have appealed to. The fact is they appeal to all of them. Very broad. Their policies were never quite committal to any one thing, and they changed their mind when it didn't go well, or when they thought that the people didn't like it. If they thought that's a bit extreme, they got rid of it. Just reacted a lot. This is an important little bit for you to think about who the Nazis appeal to if you choose to put this into a propaganda paragraph. And when you've done that and you've identified your ranking of that, continue the video and we'll go on to our last paragraph, the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic. Alright, so that's us got 2 parts done now. Hopefully you can see that. The weakness of the Weimar Republic, as we'll now focus on, is going to be focusing on the 3 chancellors in 1 year. That doesn't look particularly good, does it? That looks like chaos. The response to the depression, we've already looked a little bit at Bruning's policies, the taxes, the benefits, and of course calling on the old fears and angers of Dolchstoss and Versailles. The Weimar Republic never really started on a very strong footing, did it? Alright, so this is going to be paragraph or reason 4 now, although it says 1, 2, 3 on here. That's because, remember, I think we should try and avoid the Munich Putsch and reorganisation, because these 3 seem more logical. But if you've chosen to do that, then of course this is going to be the 4th one today. So let's get into the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic then. This new democracy that, let's be honest, even though it's 1933, it's only relatively new. It came about in 1919 after the war. So it's quite new in terms of a government, but it's been through a lot, hasn't it? It's been through an absolute ordeal. A couple of good years in there under Stresemann, but now it's just literally crashed again. So let's see how this could help Hitler become Chancellor. So reason 4 in the case of this video is the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic. A year of chaos. Let's focus on 1932 as a year of chaos. All sorts going on. Many elections. So let's have a quick recap. So hopefully from this video and your own revision, you're quite happy to see or remember that the Weimar Republic is crippled following the Depression. Brüning struggled to make the constitution work. Instead, used an Article 48 up to 66 times, which essentially is making him a dictator. So that hasn't gone down well. That's telling the people that the Weimar Constitution isn't very strong, that it can allow that to happen in the first sign of crisis, really, that someone's able to do whatever they want. So that's going to be used for the Nazis as propaganda, but also the people can see this happening, can't they? So they might feel that time to give someone some strong individual leadership a chance again, just like the good old days. They forget, don't they? The World War I was a bit of a disaster. They sort of a bit rose-tinted glasses looking back on the good old monarchy days, empire and things like that. Support for the extreme parties is growing. Hopefully you're happy with that. As always in extreme times, extreme things happen. And then remembering the numbers of the election seats. So by 1930 they won 107 seats, which has essentially shown them that they're on the right path and whatever they're doing is working. And then in the next election in 1932 they get the 230 seats. Alright, so the key point of this, although it's all going really well for the Nazis, the 107 seats, 18%, is still miles away from Hitler becoming the Chancellor. He's not the biggest party in the first election in 1930, despite the massive boost from 12 to 107. But he knows he's on the right path. So they're going to continue doing it. They're going to continue to exploit the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic. And it's this guy that's going to get a lot of the abuse in the posters, the rallies. They're going to keep saying to the people, if you vote for the same again, this is what you're getting. So they're reminding the people that most Germans are blaming the Weimar Republic for allowing the German economy to become dependent on the US loan. So even though Stresemann's dead, they are still angry that it was so badly done that as soon as one bad thing happens, the whole country goes to pot again. So they're angry about that. There should have been a contingency plan, and maybe had Stresemann survived, he might have dealt with it better than Brüning did. I don't know. We'll never know. Maybe Stresemann would have had the respect or the kudos to perhaps negotiate a bit with America a bit better. I don't know. The fact is, America wanted their money back, so that's going to be blasted at the weakness of the Weimar Republic. They criticise him for failing to deal with the worst effects of the depression, the unemployment. So when people need help the most, Brüning raises taxes and reduces their benefits. Brüning asks Hindenburg to invoke Article 48, as we've mentioned many times in this video, to reduce the need for the Reichstag. It becomes a dictatorship. It just looks utterly chaotic, doesn't it? All right, so how you might want to do your notes on this particular paragraph, just in order for you to organise your thoughts really in how to put it in a paragraph, is that 1932 was a year of chaos, showing the political weakness of this institution, the Weimar Republic, whereas the Nazis, of course, and remember to keep saying that, the Nazis are offering strong, stable leadership, strong government. So we'll start off with Brüning as Chancellor. There are 2 elections in March and April, so people are having to go out and vote for the presidential elections. Hitler wins 11 million of those in 1932 in March, and he wins 13 million in April. Hindenburg is re-elected because there was no majority in the first one, and then Hindenburg is re-elected in the second one. So within 4 months of 1932, we've had 2 elections, okay? This is important. Then we have a new Chancellor, because Brüning steps down, von Papen. He becomes the Chancellor, so that's the second Chancellor in the year. So we're only 5 months in. We've had 2 elections and 2 Chancellors. July 1932, we have another election, this time for the Reichstag, the general election, and this is where the Nazis get their 230 seats. So although Hitler doesn't quite get enough to be the president, now in this election in July, he's got enough to say to Hindenburg, okay, make me Chancellor now, because we are clearly the biggest party, and isn't that what democracy is? And of course, part of the reorganisation was, he's even said it, we've seen sources in our course, haven't we, where Hitler said we will use their own constitution against them. Now he has the opportunity to do that. So then we have another Chancellor in December of 1932. Schleicher becomes Chancellor. So what are you saying to the people? 3 Chancellors in 1 year. It's going to be, 4 when Hitler gets it. Hitler goes to Hindenburg and says, come on, now you have to make me Chancellor because this is chaos. And of course, on January the 30th, 1933, which is the entire focus of this question and this revision video, how does Hitler become Chancellor? Well, it's clear. He's got the votes. He's gone to Hindenburg and he said to Hindenburg, you can't not, really. And Hindenburg hates Hitler, remember. He can't stand them. But really, he can't do anything but. So that's the first bit of your paragraph here for the weakness of the Weimar Republic. The chaos, the Brüning, his actions, the Article 48, all of that stuff, the taxes, the benefits. And then your final bit of this paragraph really will be the deal, the political deal. All right, and that's what gets Hitler into power, really. So let's make an inference here that you can absolutely quite easily do. Again, practicing if it's question 1. What's the inference about the stability of the German government? Well, it's going to be that they're unstable. Why else would you have 4 chancellors in 1 year? We've just seen that in our own country, haven't we, over the last couple of years? With, I think we had 3 or 4, maybe even 5 prime ministers in the last couple of years. It's been a bit chaotic. It doesn't fill you with confidence, does it? All right, so the next bit we think about is this deal, the political deal. So von Papen, who remember was Chancellor for a little bit last year in 1932, he says to Hindenburg, make Hitler the Chancellor, give him what he wants to shut him up, but make von Papen the Vice Chancellor. They think that they're going to control Hitler. They think they can sort of abuse him almost. Not abuse him in terms of like abuse, in the terms of the literal word of that, but they feel like they can make the decisions and Hitler will just be a little figurehead. He thinks he's got what they want. So they're underestimating Hitler here again, aren't they? They say we'll push Hitler into a corner that he'll squeak like a mouse within 2 months because he essentially won't be able to do anything. Hindenburg is a little bit skeptical. He knows that Hitler seems to always come out of every situation smelling roses. So that's what they do anyway. So the deal part is, all you need to say is, the political deal made Hitler Chancellor with the premise that von Papen was going to be the Vice Chancellor and they essentially would control him. So in the 12 cabinet members in the government, the Nazis were only going to have 3. All right, so they're going to have Frick, Goering and Hitler as the cabinet members. That means that there are obviously 12 members of the cabinet there who are not Nazis, the rest of the cabinet. So anything these guys want to do, they're not going to be able to, are they? In theory, the deal sounds like a masterstroke, a political masterstroke. They've given these three people what they want. The Nazis, he's the Chancellor. The people have got the leader that they want, so they'll all be happy and go away and stop causing trouble. But then there's like 9 other people who are going to oppose anything that they do. So that's where we're going with this. So von Pappen's going to be the Vice Chancellor, is going to control everything. So that is where we are. Okay, they've got Hitler as Chancellor. That's the point of the story, but the deal is really important. And your analysis in this paragraph, remember we've talked a lot in this video about analysis, is going to be saying that that is important, but would he have been able to demand this chancellorship with 230 seats had he not done so well in the election? So is the election more important, or the posters? Hopefully, as we've said it a lot in this video, you can start seeing verbally how we get this analysis into our 12 marker, in fact into any paragraph that we write when it's an essay. So the Hindenburg and von Papen think they've got Hitler where they want him, they've given him power. As we know later on, and nothing to do with this video, how he becomes Chancellor, the Reichstag fire happens, doesn't he? Then there's another election in March where they get the 288 seats because they blame the communists, and that's how they do this. But essentially, the Weimar Republic seems to be problem solved. Hitler's Chancellor, everyone goes away happy, and it doesn't quite work out like that for Hindenburg and von Papen, but he is Chancellor. So that's the end of our story, really. We've gone through 4 strong reasons. The last 3 I would like to sort of emphasize to you to do those ones. They seem more obvious, they seem a little bit easier. And then this photograph is one of the most important photographs really of the 20th century, where Hitler is shaking Hindenburg's hand, has become Chancellor. Okay, so let's have a little think about where we are on everything we've said. These are the 3 paragraphs that I suggest that you look at in detail. And then there's your facts. You've got to know the seats, 12, 107, 230. The 1931 is less important because you've got plenty to say otherwise, but you definitely want to be saying that 12 to 230, something happened that led to that, and quite clearly the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression, and then the propaganda. Could they have done the propaganda without the Wall Street crash? That's your analysis and that's your judgment. Okay, so this has been quite a long video, I understand that, and we did say that at the start, wouldn't we? So watch it in bits. So now what we'll do is we'll have a little look at this as an exam zone, okay? But before we do that, just consider Hitler himself, somewhere in there, probably the propaganda, that he's very good at speaking skills. We know all this, don't we? The Führerprinzip, this idea they made him a myth, a hero coming from the heavens. All of it, the propaganda really worked. He said what people wanted to hear, and he ditched unpopular policies, as we've already mentioned. Never quite commits to one thing or other, trying to keep that broad appeal. And he refused to deal with von Papen unless he was made Chancellor. So he's not daft, is he? Hitler has really put himself in the position to get himself to be Chancellor. He's very decisive, unlike Brüning and other Weimar leaders. So he's everything that the people need, everything the country needs to make Germany great again. So him himself probably could do with a little bit of consideration as well. So all of this considered, you should hopefully have a nice knowledge base for this question, all right? And of course, as we've said, the good old days of strong leadership. So let's do the exam practice. What we have done so far in the hour and 10 minutes of this video so far is prepare for this question. Explain why Hitler was able to become Chancellor. You may use the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression. You may use the weakness of the Weimar Republic, but you must use one of your own. In this case, it would be propaganda. Or if you were determined to do the rebranding and reorganisation of the party. Remember with the 12 mark, you do not need to use the 2 bullet points. You can do whatever 3 you want, but they're there to help you. So you can stop the video now. I would recommend, having done this video, whether you've done it in chunks or not, or if you've done a paragraph as you've been going, go and have a go at writing this. You're looking at 18 minutes to try and get a good 12 marker done. Remember that analysis language and judgment throughout your paragraphs. No need for an actual intro or conclusion though. Just try and do those mini little conclusions within the paragraphs. And then we'll have a look at this as a section B and a question 1. Okay, so we're not going to do a model answer for the 12 marker here because I feel like you've got plenty to work with to go and try and get this done yourself. So let's have a look at what it might look like as a question 1. And you can have a go at this one. So question 1, remember, is the inference question. It's hard to really practice it or to revise for it. One thing that you must remember though is it requires 0 knowledge. You should not be bringing in any own knowledge of the course into the inference question, because an inference is basically what do you think. Alright, so we've got to do 2 from this source. It's called the temporary triangle. We need to give 2 inferences. So pause the video, have a quick go at that. Just put 2 in your notes, in your Google Doc, or whatever you're making your notes, and then come back to the video and I'll give you a couple of examples of what could work for this. Okay, hopefully you've got a couple of practices there that you've done. So I have said, I can infer that Hitler wasn't really stable and in control. All right. The reason why I can tell this is because he's being held up by two other people who could drop him at any point. He's sort of holding on a little bit. It doesn't look strong, does he? And then the second inference I come up with, I can infer that Hitler was very well supported and popular. And then I've said I can tell this because there are many people behind him with Nazi flags supporting him. So you might have got different inferences to me, but just a little practice of an inference there is always useful to practice. And remember that section A of paper 3 is this 4 marker and then the 12 marker, and then section B is going to be the source and interpretations part. All right, so this is crucial. I know we've been in this video for a long time now, but I suggest you perhaps stop the video now, go away and have a break again, consolidate all of your thoughts for this video, and then sit down properly and spend some time with how to do section B. All right, it's worth the most. It's worth 36 marks of the whole paper, and it is as close as any part of our exams that you'll get to being a script that we can practice. Okay, so there's 4 questions in section B that will add to the 12 marker and the inference question. The first one is the source usefulness question, the same as the trenches, so we need to do 2 cop paragraphs, why source B is useful, why source C is useful, with some provenance, and then you've got your interpretations questions, the 4 marker, what's the view, and then why are they different, and then the big 20 marker. Okay, so that's what section B is going to be. We should be able to practice this so much that when you sit down in this exam, you have no fear, absolutely no fear at all, because essentially the frame and writing structure of all of the 4 questions remain the same. It's just what you fill it with from the interpretations and from the sources. So let's have a little think about 3A then. Okay, so source usefulness question. How useful are sources B and C for an inquiry into how Hitler becomes Chancellor? Now, all 4 questions in section B will all be about Hitler becoming Chancellor. Okay, so pause the video as always, have a little practice of your cop. So write down some content that you've picked out, then you can back it up with some own knowledge. Remember, our 2 source paragraphs, just like the trenches, they do not need to be compared to each other. You don't need to say one is more useful than the other. They are both useful. So pick out some content. Start with source B is useful for an inquiry into how Hitler become Chancellor, and then say source B says. Write the sentence, back it up with some own knowledge, and then say source B also says. Back it up with some own knowledge. Try and get an inference in there if you can, something you can maybe work out from the source if you can, and then bring in your 2 examples of provenance. In real life, you'd get much more provenance than you've got in these examples. You get a date probably, basically trying to work out who made the source, when was it made, why was it made, what is the source, all those things and how that makes it useful. All right, so remember when you're getting your own knowledge in, you're saying things like, this makes it useful because I know that this happened and that happened, which makes this source more accurate. Remember the idea of being typical. So for the second source, source C, again, typical, one poster, but typical of the posters, the messages. Do that again, do your little COCO and PP, and then perhaps after that have a go at actually writing this question. Again, you're looking at 12, 13 minutes, maybe 14 at a push to try and get this done as well. 2 paragraphs with your little structure there. So remember there's a bit of a script there as well. All right, so then we move on to question 3B. 4 marks, and it's asking you what is the main difference in the views of interpretation 1 and 2 about how Hitler becomes Chancellor. Remember, the whole of section B is about how Hitler becomes Chancellor. So you would start with your little quote at the bottom, or your writing frame if you like, the structure. The view of interpretation 1 about how Hitler becomes Chancellor is, work it out, and then you'll say, I can tell this because it says, and then put a full sentence in there that made you think that. All right, so quite similar to the inference question really there. So the view of interpretation 1 about Hitler becoming Chancellor is that they were good using propaganda. All right, the first 2 words say that, but you want to put a full sentence in. And then you say, whereas the view of interpretation 2 about Hitler becomes Chancellor is, and I feel in this case it's looking at the depression, the crisis, the economic crisis, the unemployed, and then you say, I can tell this because it says, and then pick 1 full sentence from interpretation 2. And that is question 3B done then. Okay, so now what we've done is we've done some work on the sources and we've done some work onto the interpretations. And then we very quickly move on to 3C, which is again another 4 marker, but dead straightforward this one. This is asking you, why are these interpretations different? And this is where we can bring our sources back now. All right, so you know the sources we did for 3A? So you are going to start this answer no matter what it's about. You're going to say the interpretations are different because they are based on different sources. Okay, that's what you're doing, no matter what. It's the easiest way to do it. You might have to do a little bit of donkey work to try and match them up, which you'll see in a sec. But essentially what you're saying to the examiner, the reason why they're different is the two historians have written their book or whatever it is. They've got their interpretation because they've been looking at different sources that has essentially made their mind up for them. Okay, so then all you need to do is match up one of the interpretations to one of the sources, and you'll see that they will match up. It will absolutely be clear in the exam that which ones they match up. So let's have a little look here. I have matched up with, I think, interpretation 1 and source C match up, and interpretation 2 therefore and source B match up. So have a look here to see if you can have a look why that is, and then we'll see. I'll write a little model answer now. So I have written the interpretations are different because they are based on different sources. Then I need to write something that sort of shows what they both say that's similar. So I've said interpretation 1 is based on sources like source C. So when you're doing this source one, you need to say based on sources like. Remembering that no historian would ever use just one source. So they're going to look at loads of sources that essentially support their view. And then I've tried to match them up as best as I can without writing loads and loads and loads. It's only a 4 marker, but I've said this is clear as interpretation 1 refers to the use of propaganda targeting a specific group, and source C is an example of a group they targeted using propaganda posters, the unemployed. Whereas interpretation 2 is based on sources like source B, so the other source. Remember as well, we've done the sources already, so you should know already which sources generally fit with the other one. So as you're doing the first 2 questions in section B, just keep that in mind and think, oh, these match. I'll come back to that in a minute. For the 3C, I've said this is clear as interpretation 2 talks about how many new members rose from the unemployed, and source B is from a member who claims Hitler offered him hope of work, so he joined. Okay, so hopefully you can see there that I've matched them up by talking about something they both say that's quite similar, and there's our 4 marks. Done. All right, so we need to get through that bit quite quickly. Unlike some of the other papers where we might encourage you to do the big questions first, so 16, 12 and 4, in this case, in paper 3, you really need to do section B in order. And hopefully you can see why, because you're doing a lot of the donkey work in the earlier questions that we can just then tag into our little script for this. So then we have the 20 marker, which might sound scary because it's 20 marks. It's 16 plus 4 SPAG. So you need to try and make sure that your SPAG and your quality of written communication is good. But it's going to ask you, how far do you agree with interpretation 2 about how Hitler became Chancellor in 1933? So as we've said already, we know, don't we, that this is about Hitler becoming Chancellor, the whole of section B. We've read the interpretations already for several questions, so we can get straight into it. So I'm going to really briefly show you how to structure this, but again, similarly, it's a script, okay? So it's quite straightforward. Hopefully you'll agree, and again, with practice, it will become easier. So they're going to start with your judgment. Because it requires a judgment, how far do you agree? You need to give it in your introduction. So you're going to say, as always, I agree or disagree to a larger extent with interpretation 2 about how Hitler became Chancellor. All right, so you've made your judgment nice and clear. Probably don't need to worry too much about thesis statements or criteria for this one, really. Just get straight into it. Okay, you've made your judgments and you're going to hopefully talk about it throughout in your paragraphs. So really this is just now 2 big paragraphs and a conclusion, but the 2 big paragraphs are going to be essentially saying how interpretation 2 is correct and interpretation 1 is correct. They're both correct because it's someone's opinion, isn't it? That's the difference. It's not asking you your opinion, it's asking you which you agree with. So you have to say how they're both correct. So let's see how this might be structured for paragraph 1. Okay, so you might start paragraph 1 with, and I recommend you do, on the one hand, as we always do when we're trying to open up a 2-sided argument, on the one hand just lends itself perfectly, doesn't it? The view of interpretation 2 that Hitler became Chancellor due to the Great Depression is correct. So that's how you're opening it up. You're reminding the examiner what the view of interpretation 2 is. You know this off by heart because you did it in question 3B. And then you go on to, similarly to the source question, pick out a sentence from the interpretation. So then say, interpretation 2 says, write the sentence, so the content you're picking out, that refers to the depression or the economic crisis. And then add a bit of own knowledge. So very, very similar to the source question. You do not need to bring in any provenance into this, so it doesn't matter about when it was made, who made it, or any of that stuff. and then you repeat. So you do that for another quote. So very similar to the sources. Hopefully you can see content plus some more knowledge, content plus some more knowledge. Obviously it's worth 20 marks, so you probably do want to be bringing in a little bit more on knowledge in this. But make sure you bring quotes in. The quotes are more important because it's asking you about interpretation 2 and 1. It wants you to use the interpretations in your answer. That's more important than the knowledge in this case. But try to make sure your paragraph is quite good with quotes and own knowledge about all the things you know relating to the Great Depression and how it helped Hitler become Chancellor. And then paragraph 2, you're going to repeat what we've just done, but you're going to start with on the other hand. So again, we're telling the examiner, we're flipping over our judgment to the other side of the argument. And you're going to, again, remind the examiner what the view is. So you're going to say the view of interpretation 1, that Hitler became Chancellor due to the Nazi propaganda, is also correct. Now we need to pick out 2 sentences matched up with your own knowledge about propaganda. And clearly, we've already done in this lesson, this live lesson, this revision lesson, loads of propaganda stuff. So it should be a bit easier for you to do it now. You would never get the same kind of question for a 12 marker as section B. So although we've done loads of propaganda in this video and you're now getting a chance to practice this now, the reason why I've done that is so hopefully you can be quite confident in practicing section B based on the learning that we've done in the video. So anyway, 2 quotes matched up with some own knowledge. Remember, no provenance at all. And then our conclusion. This is where it gets a little bit sticky. Different. This is unique. This is the only exam where you'd have to do something like this of our history exams. So you are going to say one more time, as always, which interpretation you agree with the most. Hopefully the one you started with in your introduction. Don't change your mind. But now you're going to start analysing the interpretations a bit more for their tone, for the content, the language and the style. Very much like English. So think about your English head on for this one. You're going to be judging the interpretation and why you like one more than the other, because perhaps you think it's more factual, it's got more facts in. We can see from interpretation 2 that it's full of numbers, it's got loads of facts, whereas looking at interpretation 1, there's no facts, are there? So you might see that as a strength to interpretation 2, which is why you agree more with that one. You might feel the language is a bit less emotional, just straight to the point. Maybe they don't use dramatic words. I don't know, like sometimes like you could say Stresemann was, I don't know, the most glorious leader of all time. That language, glorious, is very opinionated, isn't it? It's very dramatic. Maybe you would value something more formal, okay? And that's your judgment. But perhaps you might then, of course, value something more emotional. You might value the I don't know, excited tone of one of the historians. You might think, oh, I really like this one because this guy really believes what he's saying. So you've got to think a little bit about that. Maybe you're thinking about one of the interpretations got a broader focus, so it talks about lots of things in the topic, and one perhaps just talks about one thing. So I guess in the interpretation 1, it seems to just talk about a bit vague, isn't it? It targets some groups, doesn't say really what groups. So that could be a bit vague, whereas there's some clear evidence and some clear facts in interpretation 2. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you in what we mean by the tone and the language of the interpretations and why you think you agree with one more than the other. Now, ideally, you'll be bringing some of that tone into the paragraphs, not just tagged into the conclusion at the end. So try and do that within your paragraphs. That will help obviously pad out your paragraphs as well, but still make sure in the conclusion you just reiterate those things you've already said in your paragraphs about the interpretations, and then why you value them so much, and of course why you didn't value the others. You didn't think there was enough facts in interpretation 1 perhaps. You thought it was too vague, stuff like that. So with this on the screen now, please have a little practice of the whole of section B. Just make sure you get it absolutely nailed. It would be a real shame to get into section B in your exam and lose marks, especially when there's such a script to it. And it can really be, you can almost predict what section B could be. Okay, so let's have a little think about this. Remember what we're thinking. It will all be about the same topic with the same question stem. It's a skill, and any skill can be practiced and mastered. There is essentially a script style that you can use to ensure you're saying what you need to say every single time, and then you just add in the relevant content. And it requires the right amount of time. You've got to spend most of the exam on this. So your exam is an hour and a half. I reckon you probably need to be spending about an hour and 5 minutes on this section. All right, there's 36 marks, and we should be guaranteeing for all of you at least 26, even on a really bad day, losing 10 marks. we need to make sure, especially for the source questions and the 2 little 4 markers, we need to make sure we're getting them right every time. Okay, so you can basically make up any section B whilst you're revising at home or whilst we're doing stuff in school. And because we know that it's always going to be based on 2 interpretations. So I've got a couple of examples of topics that could be a section B, but there are almost unlimited. So we could have the Munich Putsch. Munich Putsch, one interpretation says it was successful, one says it failed. We know that. That would be a lovely section B. Obviously, you'd have a source that supports one as well as the other. The Hitler Youth, some kids liked it, some kids didn't. Some valued it, some didn't. Some say it was successful, some say it wasn't. Look at the opposition youth groups, you know, the swing youth group and the Edelweiss Pirates and stuff. Things like that. Religion, I haven't put that on here, but you could have religion, couldn't you? Hitler dealt with religion or he didn't. You know, we've got women. It was successful or not successful. It was good or it was bad. The policies towards women. Control. Was it terror that controlled Nazi Germany or was it propaganda? These are anywhere where there's a 2-sided argument could be a section B. Hitler to Chancellor. So this whole topic we've done today, this whole revision video, propaganda, depression, Hitler himself, weaknesses of the Weimar Republic. Early challenges to the Weimar Republic could be one. So was it political violence was the biggest challenge, or was it economic, so hyperinflation or Spartacus, a cap putsch, things like that. Consolidating power, was it the Reichstag fire that got him into dictator, or was it the Naval Act, or the Night of the Long Knives, or was it Hindenburg dying? So hopefully you can see how section B will work. It could be anything as long as there's a clear 2 sides to it, because it will always be one interpretation versus another. And remember that both interpretations are always correct because it's somebody's opinion, just like you've got your opinions. So hopefully now, spending some time with this section B, you're starting to feel a bit more confident with it. And the more you practice it, the better you'll feel on exam day and for your mocks as well when you're doing them. All right, so thank you so much for hanging around for this video for 90 minutes. Remember, all lessons are on our website, stchistory.com. And the lessons within this overall video are obviously going to be there as well as a separate lesson. So the reorganisation of the party will be a separate lesson on its own. But this, having it all together, hopefully you'll find that useful. So thank you once again for watching. Hopefully this was useful and has got your confidence up a little bit on this very, very big topic. And we'll see you soon for the next video. As always, if you've got any questions, please let your teacher know. All right, thank you very much and goodbye.